The cruelest goodbye isn't spoken with tears. It's given with a gentle smile. The doors to the Luna wing stood open, swaying softly as the evening breeze wandered through polished stone corridors that had once echoed with quiet laughter. Alpha King Damien Ashcroft slowed his stride, an unfamiliar feeling tightening in his chest. The royal palace had never been silent. Servants usually hurried between candlelit halls, musicians practiced somewhere beyond the grand staircase, and the scent of fresh cedar and lavender always drifted from the private residence of the Luna. Tonight there was only stillness. He stepped inside, expecting Evelyn Carter to rise from her favorite chair beside the tall bay window, a book resting on her lap and that calm smile waiting for him no matter how late he returned. She had greeted him that way after every council meeting, every border inspection, every victory celebration. She had never demanded explanations. She had never complained about another lonely evening. She simply smiled as though his presence alone completed the room. But the chair was empty. The fireplace had gone cold. Fresh flowers no longer brightened the windowsill. Even the silver tea set she carefully prepared each sunset had disappeared. Damien frowned, convincing himself she must have stepped into the gardens. His gaze wandered across the room until it settled on the polished oak table in the center of the chamber. Resting there was the Luna's ceremonial ring, its moonstone catching the fading light. Beside it lay the royal crest she had worn over her heart for 7 years. Nothing else. No dramatic farewell. No acquiescence. No desperate plea asking him to stay. Only 2 simple objects placed with impossible care. He reached for the ring, surprised by how cold it felt against his palm. Beneath it rested a folded piece of ivory paper written in Evelyn's graceful hand. The message contained only one sentence. A heart is not a throne that waits forever. Damien read the line again, unable to connect those gentle words with the woman who had stood beside him through every season of his reign. She was supposed to argue. She was supposed to demand answers after the council insisted he consider a political marriage to strengthen the kingdom. Everyone expected Evelyn to fight for her place as Luna. Even Damien had believed she would. Instead, she had offered him one final smile that morning, wished him a safe journey, and quietly walked away while the palace watched without understanding what they had just lost. For the first time since claiming the crown, the strongest alpha in the kingdom found himself standing in a room that felt far larger than any battlefield, because every corner reminded him of someone whose quiet love had disappeared without making a sound. The palace woke before sunrise, yet something invisible had already unraveled. The servants moved through familiar routines with uncertain hands, pausing outside the Luna wing as though expecting its doors to open at any moment. They had all believed Lady Evelyn would return before breakfast. She always did. Whenever disagreements surfaced within the council, she answered them with patience instead of pride. Whenever whispers spread through the royal court, she silenced them with quiet kindness rather than sharp words. No one imagined that this time would be different. Damien carried the folded letter inside the pocket of his coat throughout the morning council meeting. Reports were read aloud about trade routes, neighboring pacts, and preparations for the upcoming Harvest Moon Festival, but every sentence dissolved into distant echoes. His attention drifted again and again toward the empty chair that had always belonged to Evelyn. She had never spoken often during these meetings. Instead, she observed, remembered every name, and somehow noticed the concerns that even experienced advisors overlooked. More than once she had quietly suggested a solution after everyone else had exhausted themselves arguing. Damien had accepted those moments as naturally as breathing. Only now did he realize he could not remember the last time he had actually thanked her. Lord Gregory, the oldest member of the council, finally cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, should we prepare an announcement regarding Lady Evelyn's departure?" Damien looked up sharply. Departure. The word sounded wrong. "She did not leave," he answered. "She simply needs time." The council exchanged uneasy glances. No one challenged him, but silence often carried more truth than conversation. After the meeting ended, Damien wandered through the palace without announcing his destination. Every hallway carried traces of Evelyn that had once gone unnoticed. A young maid smiled while arranging fresh flowers exactly the way Evelyn had taught her. 2 stable boys carefully brushed an aging carriage horse because Lady Evelyn believed retired animals deserved comfort after years of service. In the eastern courtyard, Children from nearby villages laughed as they practiced reading beside the royal librarian, another tradition Evelyn had quietly begun years earlier. None of those people mentioned her title. They simply spoke her name with warmth. She had built a kingdom inside the kingdom, not through authority, but through countless gentle choices no royal record had ever bothered to preserve. By late afternoon, Damien reached the palace gardens, where white roses climbed over weathered stone arches. The head gardener, an elderly woman named Martha, lowered her watering can as he approached. She left these for spring, Martha said softly, brushing her fingers across a cluster of unopened buds. She knew they would bloom after she was gone. Damien stared at the flowers, remembering how often he had walked past this garden without stopping. Evelyn had always found beauty in seasons that had not yet arrived. He had always been looking toward the next campaign, the next treaty, the next victory. As the sun disappeared beyond the western hills, Damien finally understood something that unsettled him far more than her absence. Evelyn had not left in anger. She had prepared for this goodbye with remarkable peace, planting flowers she would never see bloom, finishing every promise she had made, leaving every room better than she had found it. Somewhere beyond the palace walls she was already beginning another chapter of her life, while the Alpha King remained surrounded by everything she had quietly built, wondering how he had mistaken unwavering kindness for a love that would never walk away. Damien ordered riders to travel every road leading away from the capital before the morning fog had fully lifted. Messengers crossed mountain passes, forest trails, and quiet farming villages carrying only one instruction: find Evelyn Carter. They returned one after another with respectful bows and empty hands. No one had seen the former Luna. Or perhaps they had, but they had not recognized a woman who no longer traveled beneath royal banners. Damien refused to believe she could simply disappear. The kingdom had always known her face. Yet as another week slipped away, an uncomfortable truth slowly emerged. The people remembered her kindness far more clearly than her title. In a lakeside village, an elderly baker recalled how she once spent an afternoon teaching children to knead bread, while laughing with flour on her sleeves. A blacksmith remembered that she quietly paid for winter coats after a fire destroyed several family homes. A traveling physician spoke of a young woman who delivered herbal supplies every autumn without asking anyone to record her name. Every story sounded different, yet every description carried the same gentle spirit. Damien listened without interrupting, realizing that he was hearing pieces of Evelyn's life he had never known existed. Back at the palace, daily routines began to reveal invisible cracks. The weekly letters sent to widows across the kingdom stopped arriving because no one else knew she had written every one by hand. The orphan scholarship fund nearly expired until the royal accountant discovered that Evelyn had personally reviewed every request before approving assistance. Even the palace kitchens felt strangely unsettled. The head cook admitted that Lady Evelyn had memorized every servant's birthday and quietly requested their favorite desserts without seeking recognition. Damien wandered through those familiar rooms each evening, noticing details that had once blended into ordinary life. Fresh blankets no longer appeared in guest chambers before unexpected visitors arrived. The music room remained silent because Evelyn had always encouraged local musicians to practice there every Thursday night. The palace had not lost its queen alone. It had lost the quiet rhythm that made hundreds of strangers feel at home beneath the same roof. One rainy afternoon, Damien entered the royal archives searching for official records of Evelyn's charitable projects, convinced there must be ledgers documenting everything she had accomplished. Instead, he found almost nothing. There were reports bearing his signature, decrees stamped with the royal seal, military victories carefully preserved in leather-bound volumes. Yet Evelyn's work existed mostly in grateful memories carried by ordinary people. The royal historian lowered his eyes with visible regret. Your Majesty, many of her requests were made without seeking formal recognition. She often said kindness became lighter when it was not measured. Damien closed the heavy record book and stared through the tall windows where rain traced quiet paths across the glass. He had spent years building monuments that would outlive him, while Evelyn had spent those same years quietly changing lives that would remember her long after stone had weathered away. For the first time, the Alpha King began to wonder if the greatest legacy in the kingdom had never worn a crown at all, but had simply walked beside him every day until the morning she chose to keep walking without ever looking back. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the forests beyond Night Hollow in shades of gold and crimson, while the palace remained trapped in a season that refused to change. Damien no longer expected to hear Evelyn's footsteps outside his study each evening, yet every sunset he found himself looking toward the corridor before remembering she was gone. The silence had become familiar, but it had never become easier. Then, almost 2 months after her departure, a merchant from the southern valleys requested an audience with the Alpha King. He carried no tribute of silver or rare spices. Instead, he offered a simple story. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "there is a woman in Willow Creek who has transformed an abandoned farmhouse into a place where anyone may rest. Travelers, widows, children, old veterans, even strangers passing through. She asks for nothing except that everyone who enters leaves with hope." Damien felt his heartbeat quicken, though he kept his expression steady. "Did she give her name?" The merchant smiled softly. "She simply introduces herself as Evelyn. She says titles belong to yesterday." Before dawn the next morning, Damien left the capital with only a handful of trusted guards, dismissing the ceremonial escort that usually followed every royal journey. For the first time in years, he traveled without banners announcing his arrival. He wanted answers, not applause. The journey carried them nearly 200 miles through rolling hills, quiet rivers, and small farming towns preparing for winter. Everywhere they stopped, someone had a story. A little girl proudly showed him a wool blanket that Evelyn had stitched after last winter's storms. An elderly carpenter spoke about the woman who insisted every lonely person deserved a chair by the fireplace during community dinners. A young schoolteacher explained that Evelyn spent every Saturday reading stories aloud, because she believed courage often began inside a child's imagination. None of them knew they were describing the former Luna of the kingdom. To them, she was simply the kind woman who always listened before speaking. Damien realized she had found something beyond the palace walls that no royal title could ever provide. By late afternoon they reached Willow Creek. It was smaller than he expected, a peaceful village tucked between gentle hills where white fences bordered fields ready for harvest. Near the edge of town stood the old farmhouse the merchant had described. Fresh paint covered weathered walls. Flower boxes rested beneath every window despite the cooling weather. Children's laughter floated through the crisp afternoon air. Damien stopped several yards away, unwilling to interrupt the scene before him. Evelyn knelt beneath the broad branches of an old maple tree, helping a little boy tie the loose lace of his worn boot. When she finished, she brushed a strand of golden brown hair behind her ear and smiled exactly as she always had, warm enough to make even nervous strangers feel welcome. The child hugged her before running toward a group of friends chasing colorful leaves across the yard. She laughed quietly, completely unaware that someone from her past stood watching from beyond the wooden gate. Damien had crossed mountains expecting to find the woman who had left him. Instead, he found a woman who had finally found herself, and for the first time he feared that the life waiting inside those simple white fences might no longer have room for a king. Evelyn looked up only after the children disappeared around the corner of the farmhouse, their laughter fading into the cool afternoon breeze. Her eyes met Damien's across the wooden gate, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. He had imagined this meeting countless times during the long journey from Night Hollow. In every version she looked heartbroken, angry, or ready to ask why he had come. Instead, she offered the same gentle smile that had once welcomed him home after exhausting days inside the palace. It was warm, sincere, and completely free of expectation. "You traveled a long way," she said softly. Damien stepped forward, suddenly aware that he had prepared speeches for every possible reaction except kindness. "I wanted to see if you were well." Evelyn nodded. "I am." There was no hesitation in her answer, no hidden sorrow waiting beneath the surface. She truly meant it. She invited him inside without ceremony. The old farmhouse was simple, yet every corner carried quiet life. Fresh bread cooled beside an open window. Shelves overflowed with books donated by neighboring towns. A large table had been repaired so many times that each piece of wood carried a different shade, yet together they formed something stronger than before. Damien recognized the same careful touch that had once transformed the Luna Wing into the warmest place inside the palace. Only now, there were no marble walls, no royal banners, and no servants waiting for instructions. Everything around her reflected choice instead of obligation. Throughout the afternoon, Villagers came and went as naturally as family. An elderly man stopped by with baskets of apples from his orchard. A young mother thanked Evelyn for watching her daughter while she worked in the fields. Two brothers delivered chopped firewood without accepting payment because, as one of them explained with a grin, Miss Evelyn helped us when we needed it most. This is simply neighbors helping neighbors. Damien watched every exchange in silence. No one bowed. No one feared saying the wrong thing. They respected Evelyn because she had earned their trust one quiet act at a time. As evening settled across Willow Creek, children gathered near the stone fireplace while Evelyn opened one of the well-worn storybooks from the shelf. Damien remained near the doorway, listening as she read with calm warmth that seemed to make the room itself feel brighter. The youngest children leaned against blankets, completely absorbed by every word. Older villagers smiled from nearby rocking chairs, listening just as closely. It was not the grand audience of a royal court, yet the peace filling that humble room felt greater than any celebration Damien could remember inside his palace. When the final page was turned and everyone returned home beneath a sky filled with stars, Damien quietly asked the question that had weighed on him since leaving the capital. Do you ever miss your old life? Evelyn looked through the window toward the lantern glowing above the front porch. After a thoughtful silence, she answered with complete honesty. I miss some people. I do not miss forgetting who I was. Those simple words settled heavily inside Damien's heart because, for the first time, he understood that she had not escaped the palace in search of happiness. She had left because happiness had been waiting for her beyond walls, where she no longer needed permission to become herself. Damien intended to return to Night Hollow the following morning, but sunrise arrived with an unexpected problem. During the night, a powerful storm swept across Willow Creek, leaving fallen branches scattered along the narrow roads and flooding several fields near the river. The bridge connecting the village to the main highway had become unsafe, forcing every traveler to remain where they were until repairs could be made. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King found himself with nowhere more important to be than a quiet farming village. He offered to help, expecting the townspeople to hesitate after learning who he was. Instead, they simply handed him a pair of work gloves and pointed toward a damaged fence beside the community garden. No one asked him to make speeches. No one praised his royal bloodline. They thanked him the same way they thanked every volunteer standing beside him. Damien spent the morning lifting broken timber, carrying supplies and stacking fresh lumber beneath the guidance of a carpenter nearly twice his age. The work was simple, honest, and strangely satisfying. Across the field he occasionally caught sight of Evelyn speaking with worried families, organizing warm meals, comforting frightened children, and making certain every elderly neighbor had dry blankets before thinking about herself. She moved with the same quiet confidence she had carried inside the palace, but here there was no distance between her and the people she served. She belonged among them because she chose to stand beside them, not above them. As the afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds, Damien sat beneath a large oak tree to rest. A little boy wandered over holding 2 cups of warm apple cider. He offered one to Damien without hesitation. Miss Evelyn says everyone works better after a break, the child said proudly. Damien accepted the cup with a grateful smile. Does she always take care of everyone first? The boy laughed as though the answer were obvious. Every single day. Even when she is tired. Even when nobody notices. Those innocent words settled deep inside Damien's heart. He remembered countless evenings when Evelyn had quietly asked whether he had eaten after exhausting council meetings, while he often answered with distracted silence before returning to another stack of reports. He had accepted her thoughtfulness as though it required no effort. Now he watched her from across the village square and finally saw the countless choices hidden inside every gentle gesture. As evening approached, the repaired bridge reopened and the villagers gathered to thank everyone who had helped restore their town. There were no royal ceremonies, only homemade pies, simple music, and neighbors sharing long wooden tables beneath strings of lanterns. Damien noticed that no one placed Evelyn at the center of attention. She preferred helping refill empty plates and making certain everyone else had a seat before taking one herself. When their eyes met across the crowded table, she smiled with the same peaceful warmth he remembered. But there was something different now. The quiet hope that had once waited for him had been replaced by quiet contentment that no longer depended on him. Damien finally understood the lesson the palace had never taught him. Respect was not created by a crown, loyalty was not guaranteed by a title, and love could never survive if it was treated as something that would always be waiting at the end of the day. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he stopped wondering how to bring Evelyn home and began asking himself whether he had ever truly become the kind of man worthy of walking beside her. The bridge was repaired by the following morning, and Damien's guards quietly prepared the horses for the journey back to Night Hollow. Yet when the captain asked whether they should depart immediately, the Alpha King surprised even himself. "Tell the council I will be delayed a few more days," he said calmly. The message traveled toward the capital while Damien remained in Willow Creek with no throne beneath him and no royal schedule directing every hour. Instead of issuing commands, he accepted whatever work the village needed. Some mornings he helped repair weathered fences stretching across open pastures. Other afternoons he carried grain into storage barns before another storm could arrive. He listened to farmers discussing rainfall, merchants planning winter deliveries, and grandparents sharing stories on shaded porches. None of them spoke to him as though he were untouchable. They simply welcomed another pair of willing hands. At first Damien found the simplicity unfamiliar. Then he discovered something unexpected. Every task completed beside ordinary people left him with a quiet satisfaction that victories on distant battlefields had somehow never provided. Evelyn noticed the change without mentioning it. She thanked him when he helped, smiled when their paths crossed, and treated him exactly as she treated every volunteer. There were no special privileges, no careful attempts to protect his pride, and no reminders of the years they had shared inside the palace. For the first time since they had met, Damien understood what it felt like to earn her trust one ordinary day at a time instead of assuming it already belonged to him. One crisp afternoon they walked together toward the small orchard at the edge of the village to gather apples before an early frost. The baskets gradually filled while golden leaves drifted through the cool air. After several quiet minutes Damien finally spoke. "I spent years believing I was protecting the kingdom for both of us." Evelyn placed another apple into the basket before answering. "I know you believed that." He looked toward the distant hills, searching for words that had never come easily. "I thought if I carried every burden alone, one day life would become easier for you." Evelyn gently brushed a leaf from the handle of the basket. "The heaviest burden was never the kingdom, Damien. It was feeling invisible beside the person I loved." Her voice remained soft, free from blame, which somehow made the truth even harder to hear. Damien lowered his eyes, remembering countless evenings when he had postponed conversations because another meeting seemed more urgent, another report more important, another tomorrow always guaranteed. He realized now that love rarely disappeared all at once. It faded quietly inside moments that seemed too ordinary to matter, until there were no moments left to save. As they carried the baskets back toward the farmhouse, a little girl ran across the field and slipped on the damp grass. Before Damien could react, Evelyn hurried over, helped the child stand, brushed the dirt from her coat, and made her laugh with a silly smile. Within seconds the little girl was running again as though nothing had happened. Damien watched from several steps away, finally understanding why every person in Willow Creek looked at Evelyn with such genuine affection. She never tried to become the center of anyone's world. She simply made every person standing beside her feel that they mattered. Walking back beneath the fading afternoon sun, Damien silently accepted a truth that changed him forever. Winning Evelyn's heart again would never begin with asking her to return to the palace. It would begin with becoming someone who never again allowed the people he loved to wonder whether they had been seen at all. Several days later, the royal messenger finally arrived from Night Hollow carrying a stack of sealed documents that demanded the Alpha King's immediate attention. Border negotiations required his signature. Winter grain reserves needed approval. The annual council gathering could not begin without him. Damien read every page in silence before folding them neatly and setting them aside. For years he would have answered those requests without hesitation, believing duty always came first. This time he looked through the farmhouse window where Evelyn was helping children hang handmade lanterns for the village harvest celebration. He realized that responsibilities would always exist. Another report would always arrive. Another decision would always wait on his desk. The only thing that had never waited forever was the heart of the woman he loved. That evening, after the lanterns filled the quiet streets with warm golden light, Damien found Evelyn standing beside the old maple tree where he had first seen her weeks earlier. The cool breeze carried the scent of apples and would smoke as families laughed together in the distance. He took a slow breath before speaking. "I came here believing I could ask you to return with me." Evelyn looked at him with calm eyes, saying nothing. "Now I understand that would only repeat the same mistake. I spent years expecting you to shape your life around mine. I never stopped to ask what kind of life you truly wanted." She listened quietly, allowing him to continue. "I cannot change the years that are gone. I cannot erase the moments when I failed to see you. But I can choose who I become from this day forward." Damien reached into his coat and carefully removed the lunar ring he had carried since the day she left. Instead of offering it to her, he placed it gently on the wooden fence beside them. "I will never ask you to wear this because you feel responsible for me, for the kingdom, or for the promises we once made. If this ring ever belongs to you again, it should only be because you freely choose it." Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the moonstone resting between them. For several quiet moments the only sounds came from distant music and leaves rustling overhead. Finally she spoke. "Do you know why I smiled before I left the palace?" Damien slowly shook his head. "Because I did not want my last memory there to be filled with bitterness. I wanted to remember that I had loved honestly, even if I had to leave to protect that part of myself." Her words carried no anger, only quiet truth. She looked back at him with gentle sincerity. "I believe people can change, Damien. I have seen it happen many times. But trust grows more slowly than regret." Damien nodded. "Then I will wait as long as it takes." Evelyn smiled, the same warm smile that had once welcomed him home after every long day. Yet this time it carried something new. It was no longer the smile of someone hoping to be chosen. It was the smile of a woman who had already chosen herself. She carefully picked up the lunar ring and placed it back into Damien's hand. "Keep it," she whispered. "If one day our paths become one again, I want it to represent the future we build together, not the past we are trying to repair." Damien closed his fingers around the ring, understanding that the greatest promise he could make was not asking her to return tomorrow, but becoming someone worthy of hearing her answer whenever that tomorrow finally arrived. Winter arrived gently across Night Hollow, and with it came changes the kingdom had never expected. After returning from Willow Creek, Damien quietly declined every proposal to appoint a new Luna. The royal chamber beside his own remained exactly as Evelyn had left it, not because he wished to preserve old memories, but because he refused to fill an empty place with someone who had never chosen it. Instead of spending every hour inside council halls, he began traveling through the kingdom without grand ceremonies, listening to farmers, teachers, craftsmen, and families whose voices had once seemed too small to reach the throne. He restored village schools, expanded support for widows and orphan children, and created community councils so ordinary people could speak directly to the crown. Whenever advisors praised the new policies, Damien answered with the same quiet words. "These ideas were always here. I simply failed to see them." Seasons passed, and the stories of the Alpha King slowly changed. People no longer spoke only of his strength or victories. They spoke about a ruler who stayed after meetings to hear one more question, who remembered children's names, and who thanked servants before leaving the palace. Far away in Willow Creek, Evelyn heard those stories from traveling merchants and smiling neighbors. She never asked whether they were true, yet each new season carried another small reminder that genuine change was measured through consistent actions rather than beautiful promises. Nearly a year after the day she walked away, Evelyn returned to Night Hollow for the kingdom's annual spring celebration, invited not as a former Luna, but as the founder of the community house that had inspired similar projects across the realm. Damien greeted her at the palace entrance with the same respect he offered every honored guest. There were no expectations waiting behind his smile, only gratitude that she had come. As they walked together through gardens where the white roses she once planted had finally bloomed, Evelyn noticed children laughing beneath their branches while families gathered without fear or formality. The palace felt different, warmer, more alive. Damien stopped beside the fountain where they had once crossed paths countless evenings before. He opened his hand, revealing the lunar ring he had carried every day since leaving Willow Creek. He did not offer it. He simply looked at her with quiet hope. Evelyn smiled, reached for his hand instead of the ring, and gently intertwined her fingers with his. "Now," she whispered, "it feels like we are walking in the same direction." The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming roses through the palace grounds as the bells of Night Hollow echoed. Across the kingdom. This time no one had won by holding on too tightly, and no one had lost by walking away. They found each other again because love had finally become a choice renewed each day, and that choice was worth far more than any crown either of them could ever wear.